where we left off in that previous video, and really start getting into some of the details of what's going on in chapter 1.1 now that we have a sense of what's going on in our markdown file overall. So like I said before, you could clear out this original text, and that might be a good idea. We can start from scratch and build some of that out. So something that happens with the book and where the book's data are coming from is its own package. So there's a data package that is on the server already installed, but we have to load it in. So this is a little bit more of the explanation of what's going on in R. If you're familiar with R and R packages, you can skip ahead a little bit. It's essentially that packages are sort of like books in the library, and you could think the Smith College Library in 2020 is a really good example where most of the books are actually off-site. So imagine that you wanted something that's in the collection, you have access to it, but it's not nearby. So here R needs you to call in the things that you want to have nearby. And so we're going to call in this data by using the library function, and then the data for the book are Stat2 data, which is Stat2 is the textbook and the data for that book. And so then we can run this code chunk to bring in that file. And we can double check that file, or the package came in by going over to packages in this bottom right quadrant, right? These are different tabs at the top. And if we go to and search for Stat2, the fact that this is checked means that it's loaded in now. If you look and see different packages that are unchecked, those aren't yet loaded in. We would need to load those in. So everybody should have access to this. So that was the first step, was to build in that library. And then we want to bring in the data. So then we're going to say data, we're going to use the data function, and it's going to start to give you some options of different names of data sets that you might be wanting. And these first sort of sets are all preloaded into R. And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll start seeing ones that are capitalized, and then in another alphabetical order, and these are actually the books packages. So you could also, you don't need to scroll through that. If you know the name of the data, you can put that in, and note that this has to go in quotes for it to work. So in fact, let's just practice it without the quotes and just sort of see what happens. So then we can run this code chunk again, and it actually does bring it in. Sometimes that works, and also sometimes that doesn't. In general, it's probably a good idea to have this in quotes. So I'll run that again, and you'll notice that when that got run, that it brings into this top right quadrant a data set called accord price that has 30 observations and 3 variables. You can play around here. This sort of arrow on the left toggles up and down, so you can see what those variables names are and some of the first observations. Accord price is also sort of the name of the data set. It's also linked, so you can click on that and it sort of pops this up as a tabular format. Just a couple of options that are going on here. So in this first section, so for exercise 1.1 in chapter 1.1, the example 1.1 is really just bringing in these data and being able to example 1.1, and it's being able to show that you can sort of if you look at the table, at least in the second edition, just is printing that out. So what we need to do then is to insert another code chunk. So we can go here and to insert. You could also sort of type this in. So the code chunks are these 3 forward kind of single quotes, and then R in this curly Q bracket. Or you can use this pull down menu if that feels more comfortable for you. And so here we can just use a comment or a function called head, and with the name of the data set, accord price. Again, that's going to pop up. Once you start typing, it'll sort of auto generate that. And we can run this again here, and it gives us just the first 6 rows. And what is happening in the book is instead that we want all of them. So we could say print instead, and that will give us all 30 rows. So there's a couple different ways to just make sure that your data are there. Head just gives you the first 6. If you need all of the data set observations, you can use that as well. This will look a little different when we knit this file, but that's in principle what's going on here. So let's just let's knit this file again. And be careful here, because every time you knit, it resaves the file. And so if the name is the same, it's going to write over the file every time you knit. So be careful that you don't lose work there. But essentially, now we have just this example 1.1 with the data that are printed out here as they are. And so you'll see that this corresponds closely to what's going on in the book, and that's really all that's there for example 1.1. There's a couple other features that are actually in that example that I'll go through in another video for people who are more familiar with R and are ready to get into kind of more complicated stuff.